By definition, comprehensive criminal justice reform seeks to address what happens before, during, and after a person encounters the criminal justice system. Sentencing reform, better conditions behind bars, and improving the chances for success after time served. In this week's in-depth conversation, we'll discuss a legislative proposal that hopes to give former inmates the help they need to succeed on the outside. Here's moderator Susan Cadot and her distinguished panel of guests.
Yes, thank you, Rich. We're here to talk about what's being known as the Sarah Stitt Act in the Oklahoma legislature, and I have four panelists to help us explain what that is and how it could affect some Oklahomans who are truly in need. I'd like to first introduce our guest, Marilyn Stark, who is an Oklahoma representative from Bethany. We have Jamie Mays, who is a board member with the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance. Justin Wolf, who is the Director of Communications and Government Relations for the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. And finally, Samantha Faulkner, who is an employee at Renaissance Center for Women, the Take Two Cafe. Thank all of you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
All right, Representative Stark, I want to begin with you. What is the Sarah Stitt Act?
The Sarah Stitt Act is a culmination of several years' work where we will, upon release from prison, each inmate will at least receive a photo ID, a state-issued photo ID that looks like everybody else's. And then they will also receive, as much as possible, a Social Security card, a birth certificate, any certifications of trainings that they have received while in prison. They'll have a resume, and they will also have conducted a mock interview.
I understand you authored this bill with Representative Brian Hill. Tell me how that came to be.
Yes, well, I actually have a background in nonprofits. And so before I ran for office, I interacted with people who would come out of prison and they didn't have anything to show who they were except a prison ID card. And so when I ran, it was a part of what I wanted to do was to make sure they got an ID. Well, with the early commutations that happened, our First Lady got very involved with those and realized that there was a need for a lot of things to happen. And so she coordinated with Representative Hill, and they came up with the part that is the job training and the resume and the things to equip them for the workforce. And so when COVID hit, we had been advised to put them together, but COVID came and we didn't get that done. And so this year we worked very hard at getting them together so that even if you can't get all the identification you need, that we will allow you to have a photo ID based on your prison card, that it's called a CRC card. And so that's your identification. And so it's putting the two together has made one really good piece of legislation.
I want to jump to Justin really quick. Justin, tell me your thoughts on this measure and the impact it will have. Are you passionate about this?
Absolutely. At the Department of Corrections, one of our mantras is to begin with the end in mind. That said, we have a lot of reentry services that we provide to our inmates, but there are still barriers and obstacles to their success when they're released. One of those was going through the process of obtaining their identification documents after they're released. Inmates who don't have access to things like vehicles can have a difficult time going around the city to acquire identification documents. So what this bill has done is supplemented what we've already been doing with reentry efforts in that it allows us to spend funding to cooperate with the Department of Public Safety to line up those identification documents before an inmate's even released. So it will help us streamline that process. It's helped us cement that relationship with the Department of Public Safety and to help it become more effective at providing those documents to our inmate population before they're released, which lets us do everything we can to set them up for success.
Jamie Mays, why is the Oklahoma Manufacturing Alliance involved in this?
Well, you know, with the thousands of manufacturers across the state, one of their biggest problems is finding employees and keeping employees. And so several years ago, probably 2018, we got real involved when we hired a workforce person over at the OMA and just said, how do we look at all avenues for finding workers and attracting workers. And certainly one of the categories is that's near and dear to my heart, being a part of a large global company, is looking at diversity and inclusion and opportunities to provide justice-involved folks with work. So I spent a good amount of 2018 doing research, trying to figure out who was involved, how were they involved, and what the gaps were. And then building long list of manufacturers that were either already involved with second chance hiring or justice involved hiring, or wanting to join the efforts. And then just a lot of cross communication. I got involved with the commutations, went to 14 of the prisons and interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people. And then then we try to marry them up with our reps that cover the whole state, and then network them into manufacturing jobs. So, restaurant work is great. Some of the other part-time quick jobs they can get are great, but a manufacturing job is a life changer in regards to giving them a long trajectory and a good path forward. So that's what we're trying to do.
The commutations that were just brought up, those commutations really help shine a light on the question, how do we ensure success in this inmate population that's being released? That was one of the catalysts for answering this question, which is how do we set up inmates for success when we know they're going to be released? And I think that the commutations really helped identify that moment in time where we asked that question, and then we could see the best way that we could answer that question when we could see for a large group of inmates the challenges, and we could address those on the front end, and we saw them coming before they arrived. And so we could do everything that we needed to ensure that success when they were released.
Well, we have Samantha here to give us a firsthand account of what it's like to try to re-enter the workforce. Samantha, thank you for joining us. And I want to ask you, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your story and about Resonance?
So I was released in October 2017. I went through Resonance's Take 2 program. It's a 6-month recovery program. They also employed us downstairs at the Take 2 Cafe. I worked there for 6 months. I started going to college for human services, so I went directly from them to the Mental Health Association. And Deidre called me one day, and they had a reentry case manager position open for Resonance, and I've been here for over a year. Great. And so I saw, and then, on the front end, the Sarah Stitt Act did all the identification. So we work with women who are in prison through the HWR2 program, but we also work with the women who are directly released from prison. So having their identification and their birth certificate, that's like their first step, and we can secure them employment almost immediately.
I was going to say, have you heard stories from others who, I read somewhere that sometimes the only ID a newly released offender has is their prison ID. Is that true?
Yes, and it's really hard because once we're released, like I took my prison ID, I took my CRC card, and I was like, this is all I have. Like, we can't give you an ID. We can't give you a state ID. We can't do anything for you. And I'm like, this is all I have. Like, I have to have identification to work. I have to be able to put in applications, and I can't because I don't have a social. I don't have my ID. I didn't know the first step to take, so it's extremely helpful that these women have these items because they're able to secure, employment. They're able to secure other things almost immediately with those.
Justin, why don't they have a social? How do you not have a social? People have social security cards or social security numbers when they go into the system. So what's that about?
There's a lot of challenges that the inmate population face. And one of those is when they're brought into the prison system, housing that they may have gone away. The family members that they had that might have been observing those documents for them may have had circumstances change. People move. And so oftentimes inmates' plans change dramatically from when they enter prison to when they leave. And keeping track of things like vital documents can be very challenging for that population. So one of the things that we attempt to address while they're in our custody is the inmate case plan, because all inmates have some degree of needs when they're going to be released. I think that, the stat is that 98% of our inmates are going to be released at some point in time. So they'll have, whether it be job skills that they need or substance abuse training or just simple mentoring and pro-social activities, we try and address those through the inmate's case plan. And a part of that case plan is to try and acquire the vital documents that those inmates may be missing. But just like you or I sometimes have to go through the challenge of going through the DMV process or going to the Social Security office to get our vital documents, those same challenges exist for inmates when they're released, with the additional challenges of not having a convenient mode of transportation or reliable transportation. And they have to do all those things very quickly, and trying to do that while obtaining a job is just one of those obstacles or barriers that we're trying to address with this legislation.
Well, it is hard enough to go through the system and get those documents, even when you haven't lost track of your vital records. So without extra challenges, that can be a first step that's already I'm not going to try anymore, because Justin mentioned transportation, Samantha, and is that a first step that can immediately just really discourage someone?
Yeah, for sure. You've been in prison, you get out, you don't have your identification. Now, most people go to a city that they're not even familiar with. So now you have to figure out the bus system, and it gets really disheartening because all these new things are thrown at you. You don't even have your basic needs of, your identification. It makes it really hard to re-enter society whenever you don't have the tools necessary.
Representative Stark, what has been the reaction to this measure that you've introduced? And I know it was introduced before COVID kind of waylaid that along with a lot of other things, but what has been the reaction among your colleagues for this measure?
We have overwhelming support for this measure. It's bilateral, it's bipartisan, it's bicameral. Everybody sees the need and realizes, man, we should have done this a long time ago. And so I'm very happy to be a part of that process, and appreciate DOC and DPS working with us to get this to happen. And I totally agree with Justin that the commutations just shone a spotlight on what many of us had seen, but didn't know how to tell the population and get the public involved and get the whole legislature involved. But when that was such a big deal, then everybody was able to see it. And I think it actually even made it even more real for even DOC to see the difference between those who got an ID, who had all the paperwork to get an ID, and those who didn't. Oh. And I know I worked with a person in our sober living program for almost a year to get that paperwork. And I was working with him so diligently. And it was just hard. It just kept hitting wall after wall after wall. And the other population that I think about is those who come through foster care. And, we know that there's a large percentage of foster care that between 18 and 26 will end up incarcerated. Well, if they've gone through foster care, depending on how they've gone through, they may not have ever even seen a birth certificate. And so that just adds a whole other layer to it as well. And there's so much going on for that population right now, too, that this will help that as well. And it's actually even stirred looking to make sure that people in foster care have these papers before they age out, it's kind of just spurred a whole lot of things. So I think it's wonderful.
That sounds great. Jamie, I want to come back to you really quickly. Has there been any apprehension among Oklahoma employers, manufacturing employers, in hiring or employing those who are just out of prison?
It's definitely an education process from the standpoint of even understanding what a simple felony can be. And so there are a good handful, a long list of employers who are on the front end of this and very excited and educated about it. And then there are some that we as a part of the OMA, it's a soft skill that we help provide them, but there's a great toolkit out there that SHRM has put out called Getting Talent Back to Work. That has been excellent. We've been giving that to employers. That helps them understand the tax credits they can get from hiring these folks, how to get your culture ready for it. And so there's certainly a smaller percentage that we're doing more education with, trying to help them understand the benefit of hiring good people that just need a second chance.
Do you know if anyone's come to try to get hired that does not have the proper identification? Does that happen?
That does happen. Generally, the employers that are already on the front of this know how to help them get it, or direct them to folks those of us who do help do that. I was very, very involved with the folks that were commuted in making sure that we got all of them that we could in a bus to a DPS facility, and then got even if there was a gap for funding, we found folks to help pay for that. So that, again, the light on that opportunity is then, okay, then how can we and Justin, I just have to give him, the DOC, huge kudos. We spent a lot of time afterwards trying to redirect, how can we redirect internal policy at DOC to make sure that we can do this going forward. And there have been a good number of instances since then. I know pre-COVID, when we would take inmates in a bus to DPS to get them their ID. So there is good progress being made.
Samantha, an ID seems like a small thing to most of us. How big of a deal is this? How much is this going to help? And especially if you, at residence, don't have to spend so much time getting IDs, how much quicker can re-entry begin? What difference does this make?
It makes a huge difference, especially now with COVID, everything is by appointment. So it's not like I can just take them down there and try to figure it out with them. We have to go online, make an appointment. It's months out. It's extremely helpful for us and the reentry and the reunification with everyone around them. If they have their ID, it just makes it so much easier.
I would just like to say that you asked me what the support has been. The nonprofits who work with our inmates are thrilled. Because then they will not have to spend so much time just getting the ID. They can actually work on what jobs do you qualify for, what education do we need, what other things are out there, what fines you have, and a lot of their energy will not have to just go to getting that ID.
We begin with the end in mind, and each inmate's case plan is developed as soon as they enter the prison system. And that process involves identifying documents that might be missing, things like identifications or birth certificates. But as anyone who's gone to a tag agency knows, sometimes acquiring those documents can take time.
And Jamie, did you have something you wanted to add?
The two folks that we didn't mention, our career tech partners. Many the prisons have a career tech partner in the prison. And I see a lot of folks that and network with a lot of those coaches, career tech coaches. They send us folks. Everyone that they send us comes with a resume. So there is some good work being done for a small population of the folks that get to go through career tech or come out of the prison having worked for OCI, Oklahoma Correctional Industries. Those folks come out with a portfolio of their work and a resume. So, we have some good examples that we can use as we develop this and figure out, how to implement it.
I'm going to let Representative Stark wrap us up. Where does this bill go from here?
Right now, we just came out of the Senate committee, and we need to go from here to the Senate floor and then to the governor's desk.
I know we could talk more about this. We're out of time. I want to thank all of you for joining us and for all of your good work on behalf of the state of Oklahoma. You're appreciated. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for having us.